Okay, so in the last part of this lecture, I want to talk a little bit about the management of these remote collaborations and give some considerations. And now, be careful, they're not exhaustive, they're not complete by any means, but these are some of the common elements that you will find when implementing systems. And we're going to talk, after the break, we're going to talk a bit more about these challenges. So, first of all, it's good to clarify, again, that when we talk about information systems, especially in our courses in information management systems, we're not talking only about IT and information technology. That's definitely one part, where you have the data, you have the information, stored the knowledge that you want to transfer, so let's say the content of the system, and the technology you use to transfer it, so hardware, software, networks, and infrastructure. But an information system also exists of other components. The organization that you use it, whether that's a formal organization, a company, an institute, or your community, your neighborhood organization, volunteer, civic organization, doesn't matter. But within that organization, within that group, within that team, you will have policies, you will have a shared value culture, you will have processes that you will follow. And then perhaps the biggest component is the people. You know, they're the ones who are using it, but also supporting it, maintaining it, and so on. So when you design, when you implement a solution, you say, we want to work remotely, we want to implement virtual teams, or we're going to move to an enterprise resource planning system, or whatever, don't always focus on the technology. Also consider what it means for your organization, what it means for your people, and how you can connect, align these four elements in order to have a successful adoption. So let's take a look at those four components a bit in relation to remote working and online collaboration. First of all, I already talked a bit about this data and the information and the knowledge, the content that were being shared. I already mentioned this tacit explicit. So that's an extra effort that we have to make when we work remotely. We have to start typing, we have to start producing videos. So there's an extra step in transferring our tacit knowledge to somebody else when we're working remotely. So we have to think about how do we capture this knowledge. So I'm lucky at the university where I have these options and these people that can facilitate and help me make that knowledge explicit. But for organizations, depending on what you're trying to do, that might be different. So also think about how to allow for updates. You know, lectures might be valid for a couple of years even, but other information changes quickly. So it is fine you make something explicit, you type it, but how do you make sure that people know what the latest relevant information is? There's chat options, you can use intranet portals, you can use updates and so on. But especially when you put things online, it's important that people know which piece of information is the latest and how can we update it in case there is something that we need to change. Then there is now, with this push, you have to think about who has access to the data, to our information, to our knowledge. How, not only in terms of security, but also in terms of accessibility. How do we make sure that people can find what they're looking for in an easy manner? There might be more and more information now being put online than ever before. So you have to think about where would people access it from, when, how, and how can we align what we design with that so that the threshold of reaching out, collecting that information becomes lower. So and of course think about the considerations for privacy, safety, and security, but we'll talk in more and extensive detail in one of our later lectures about that. But especially those concerns when you're using public systems is something you have to be wary of. Okay, let's talk about the technology side of that. And for all of these 4 points, we're going to talk more about this after the break in the panel. But this is a graph of the Amsterdam Internet Exchange, which is a major internet connection point for the Netherlands. And you can see that since the outbreak started and as measures being produced, that the throughput in terabytes per second is increasing. So our network infrastructure is being put to the test. More people are working online. Video is pretty heavy in bandwidth use. So you can follow the graph. I'll put the link there as well from the Amsterdam Internet Exchange. And I'm sure every country has something like that. You can see the increase in traffic and our networks that are being used. And so that will be a challenge as well to keep your infrastructure in line with this growth And every organization is now working to see how they can provide the facilities. There have been outages. I've heard some companies are even doing stress testing at the moment just to see what the capabilities are so they can take appropriate measures. Coming back a little bit to the privacy, safety and security that I talked about data, the same applies to the technology. First of all, you might now see options like Google is offering free software, other companies have reduced prices, so there's a lot of options that suddenly have become interesting. A lot of people are using them. But as I said, you have the network effect. As soon as more and more people start joining you on the platform, the more interesting it becomes for others to join as well. And all of a sudden, everybody's on the platform and you can't move away anymore. As an organization, as we move through the crisis and you start, want to consolidate the systems, you might experience what we call a vendor lock. So once you start using the systems, it becomes easy to use associated systems from them. You adapt the ecosystem, and it limits your choices in the future to adapt. I'm not saying that it's per se a bad thing to go to use external vendors and outsourcing. Just a mindful consideration in rapidly doing something, because it's very hard to move away from a system once people are in it. Then the second part is dependency and control. You will see here was an outage of Microsoft Teams in northwestern Europe last Monday for 2 hours. Cloud and solutions, which these drive, are great. They allow for a much larger scale than any individual organization could be. But you do have limited control options to intervene. You're sort of dependent on the capabilities of others. Again, not saying that that's a bad thing, it's just a consideration. And again, what I said during the video conference call, think about what your options are for backups and fallbacks. And then there is, of course, privacy. A lot of these companies nowadays, if you use free software, a lot of that software, you might already know, you pay with your data. For example, I personally also used Zoom a lot, but if it's worth checking these systems and Googling them before you fully commit to them. You should also remember that your employees, or students in our case, don't have a choice. If we as a teacher say we're going to use Zoom, there's limited things that they can do. So you're sort of forcing other people to adopt the systems that you're doing. So again, not a bad thing per se, but a careful consideration for all these elements is in order. So then for organizations, remember in the beginning we talked about why do we collaborate, and now as we're collaborating more and more online, we have to start making different agreements. So our decision-making processes change. How do you make decisions online? Not everybody might be comfortable in speaking up in an online meeting. So how do you make sure that people are committed, are supporting you really? That absence of nonverbal cues also changes how we make decisions. And I think that's a key consideration. Think about meetings, protocols. Do we have to have meetings? How do we communicate? And your standing procedures. So for us as a university, there's a lot of things that we have in our documents and in our internal regulations that require, that have always assumed that people would meet in person. And we have to start revising those procedures. So it might be worth checking, even if you're not thinking about it now, or might not have encountered them, what does that mean? Are all our procedures still valid? Are they working? Do we need to adapt them? And then for the engagement, so what you could see, and perhaps you could even encourage it, is that aside from meetings, you could also have digital communities. I know organizations are using things like Slack, Mattermost, Microsoft Teams to also have these informal communication going on. I saw on Twitter last week that people did an online dance party. So they made a group video call, put on music, and started dancing together. So it is something that is also important that, if you want to keep the social cohesion, it should not only be about work. Your organization is more than the procedures. So talk to your HR people, think about how to keep people connected. And make sure everybody's in, and I'll come back to that in a minute as well. Because for some jobs, for us as teachers, it might be relatively easy to do some of our teaching online. But for other jobs, think for example IT support, facility services, they don't have an option, or their job doesn't lend very well for working remotely online, which creates a disparity in your organization. So think about how do you include everyone in the system. And then the last component I want to talk about is this fit between the people and the technology. So how do you stay in touch? And it is important that you evaluate regularly. Keep monitoring it. Don't assume that you put an application or a system in place and things are solved. This is from, I saw in Wuhan, where teachers were using an app to send kids homework. And the kids realized that this app is in the Apple Store, so they all start giving it negative reviews. So much that it was in 1 star and got removed from the store. By the way, I'm not encouraging my students to start downvoting any applications we're using, but I'm recommending organizations to keep an eye on what your users are doing, what people are perceiving. So also evaluate regularly if it's still working. Reach out, because people might not tell you directly. And think about support, because it's great that you have a lot of support, that you have these systems, but before I could take my laptop to the IT service desk, now I need my laptop to contact the service desk. So, providing support for remote support remotely is a bit of a paradox that you also have to think about. And it might require a different way of providing that support through phone numbers, additional assistance, and so on. The last point I want to conclude this section with is that this what we call the digital divide. For some of us, it might feel very comfortable to work remotely, to work online. You have the skills, you have the equipment at home, maybe you have the peace of mind at home, but not everybody has that. People might not have the opportunity, they might not have the time. Some people find it difficult, they're not trained for it. So that is what we call the digital divide. And the risk is that this digital divide now will become bigger than ever. Because people who are digitally literate will have access to more information, are able to communicate faster and quicker, and it will make the gap bigger. So people with time, resources, will benefit from it. And I would personally recommend to also think about the older people who are affected by the coronavirus. For many of us, it is easy to go online, to go on social media, to connect, to keep these interactions going. Not everybody has that option. So please don't forget to pick up your phone and also call people. Find alternative ways. Don't stay only in the internet bubble. Find other ways to especially reach those who are not there. It's easy to focus on the people who are online. Do not forget the people who are offline. Okay, so that's the 4 components I wanted to talk about in this last part. The data and the information we're transferring, the technology we use, the organization, and the people in the system. So I want to wrap up this part by first of all thanking our IT staff, and I recommend you do the same in your organization. So we've been, a lot of these people have been working day and night to make sure that the systems scale up. That people who are working in the organizations have the support they need, and they're often invisible, as you can see now. They're an invisible group of people behind the scenes. So I personally want to thank everybody here at the university for their support, and I recommend that everybody also does that for their organization. In our next lectures, and I'm not sure if we'll do it online in the same way. I'm happy to get feedback if this is something that you think we should continue doing. But there's about 3 options that we're going to explore in the next lectures. One is about social media and digital communities. So we're going to talk a little bit more, deeper dive in this subject, and specifically talk about how social media, how people collaborate, work online, using a lot of examples you see today where people start helping each other. We'll talk to experts who worked in crisis management, for example, on communication. The second topic would be e-commerce and customer relationship management, because for companies also, not only for their internal communication, but the relationship with the customers is now also shifting online. Companies are revisiting the way that they deliver their products and the services. And the final one is a subject closer to my own research, which is about information management and crisis response, and how to organize information and support decision-making processes. So those will be our next lectures. Depending on your interest, let me know if you think this is a great way to do these lectures, if you're interested in it, and if so, which subjects you would like to hear about. Before we head into the break, so after the break, we're going to continue with a panel. We're going to talk about these challenges that I introduced in this last section with our panelists. There will be Corno Vromans from our IT and Services division, the director, Astrid Kramer, our academic director from our business economics program, Heather van Engelen as one of the students graduating, and Lars Vleeshouwer, who is an expert in telecommunications and remote working. So after the break, in about 10 to 10, we'll continue with that panel. For students who are in the internal systems, if you have a question, please post it, and we'll discuss it in the panel. For now, take a coffee, take a break, stretch your legs, and we'll see you back at 10 to 10 for the second part. Thank you.